Welcome back to FM Live. My name is Mike Usrey, and today we're going to be talking about how to revamp, restore, and hopefully make them work as they should have or should have at new your brake calipers. Now, there's lots of fancy options out there to do lots of different brake kits, but what if you don't need a big brake kit? What if you want to do something with your stock brakes? What if you need to save a little bit of cash before you do the jump to a big brake kit? We do have an option. We actually have a variety of brake rebuild kits for the 1990 all the way up to 2015. So NA, NB, and NC generation of Miatas. And we have a caliper rebuild kit that will suit any of those. So we're going to talk about this one in particular, but all of the brake rebuild kits that we do offer are basically the same kind of parts and pieces, just a little bit different here and there for the different variances of the calipers throughout the years. So here in front of me, I've gathered a bunch of tools. I've gathered our caliper rebuild kit and a few stock calipers. And what we're going to do is I'll just walk you through rebuilding one of these calipers. Very straightforward, doesn't take very long to do. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. If you have any questions, we will try to answer those towards the end of the video. So feel free to drop a comment below, and if I haven't covered during the video, we'll try to get to it towards the end. So, as I mentioned before, we do have a rebuild kit. They all come in these nice little friendly boxes that are green like this. Friend Kit is a brand that actually comes from Spain. So we are their dealer here in North America for the Miata stuff. And this is our preferred brand because they come with lots of really very high quality parts, seals, and even replacement pistons. So here in front of me, let's talk about the actual parts of the kit first before we dive in. And you can see we have a replacement piston, of course. Very nice machining, actually, if you wanted to zoom in on that at all. Other than that, our kits do come with new slide bolts. They do come with a new boot, new piston O-ring or seal, has new slide covers, has a little cover for your your brake bleeder, and a new brake bleeder in case yours is crusty, and then also some rubber lube and some, we got this guy, the guide pin lube. So basically everything that you need to replace or would want to replace while you're in there, shy of the little brake pad sliders that are usually something that come with your brake pads, not with a caliper rebuild kit. So again, these parts and pieces will look a little bit different. There might be a slight variance in combination of what you get for your particular caliper. What we have here in front of us today that we'll be working on is a 1.8 liter front non-sport brake caliper. So basically if you have a 94 up to 2002 non-sport brake system, this would be the same exact one for you. All the other ones are very, very similar, front and rear. The rears do have a little bit of an extra mechanism that I won't show in this video, but the process to rebuild them is almost identical. So if you have any questions that you don't see or don't get answered in this video, drop them down below. We'll cover them at the end. And also, if you have any other questions, we can obviously help you out with those over the phone or via email as well. So now moving on to the tools that you need to be able to do this job. This is all simple tools that most people are going to have in their toolbox. So we'll start off with the most high-tech piece of machinery here. I have a piece of 1x4. And you'll see why we need this in a little bit, but you will need a piece of wood like this. I have an assortment of poking, prying, and precision driving tools over here. I have a set of pliers. Doesn't really matter if they're big, if they're pointed, if they're curved, anything like that. You just need something to grab on. I have a 8mm wrench, and this will be for the brake bleeder. I have ratchet, some sockets, so that way I can take apart the caliper. Behind those here, I have some fluids. I have some brake clean because we'll want to clean this up and make sure that it's ready to go before we put all the new parts in. Make sure it's nice and clean. And then I have some Simple Green, or insert your favorite just generic degreaser cleaner here. More about that in a moment. I also have some clean rags, so that way we can wipe stuff down. And then possibly the most important stuff here is I have some gloves to keep my hands from getting too yucky. And then I also have a nice plastic bag. You can go down to your favorite Walmartian dispensary and get a plastic bag, because we're going to use this to contain our calipers so that way we don't blow brake fluid all over the place. Again, more about that in just a bit. So, to get started, I've got some calipers here in front of me. Obviously, they're already pulled off the car. We're going to assume that you can remove them from your vehicle. Now, one thing I will recommend is that before you actually take them all the way off your car, is that there are a couple of bolts, these slide bolts, that you'll want to loosen the original slide bolts on the caliper. And that's because these guys are, generally speaking, very tight and or very stuck. So break these loose before you pull the whole caliper assembly off the car. And you can see I've already removed the pads and the little brackets and the little spring clips that were in there. That's all gone. We're just looking at just the caliper right now. So, forgot. One of the other things you will need, and this is actually pretty important because it's much, much harder to try to do this without it, and that is you will need at least a little bit of compressed air. You don't need a big compressor. Even a small portable compressor will do the job, but I have a spray nozzle with a rubber tip, so that way I can shove it into the ends of the brake lines. And then I have a regulator. So this regulator here is just a cheap one. All the hardware actually right here you can pick up from your local Hazard Frot. Very cheap, probably 20 bucks in this whole end. So if you don't have this stuff already, it's really easy to get a hold of. But I use this regulator so that way I can turn the pressure down, because your air compressor may be as much as 100 PSI. And we don't need quite that much pressure. Today I'm going to be running about 40 PSI. Just a little bit, enough to be able to push the piston out of the caliper. So we'll use that here in just a second. But first thing what we're going to do is do a little bit of disassembly on our caliper, so that way we can get to that point. And as I mentioned, you want to have broken these loose, and depending on your caliper, these non-sport calipers, they don't have an extra piece, but on the sport calipers, and I think some of the NCs, they will have an extra nut to hold the slide pins in place. So you may need an extra wrench to hold on to that nut, so that way you can take these bolts out. On these style of calipers, they're actually really easy, that I can actually just slide it out, just like that. Real easy. I will go ahead and remove these bolts, because we have new shiny ones that we're going to use to replace them. One crusty bolt. And two crusty bolts. There you go. So with our kits, you won't need those. If they're in good shape, you might keep them as spares, but we have new shiny ones, so we won't even need that at all. I won't take it out just yet, but we also will be replacing this bleeder. So I'm just going to take the cap off of that for now, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But now we have the caliper undressed, and we can actually push the piston out. Now, like I was mentioning earlier, we will use compressed air to do this, but we don't want to do it just like this, because if you do it like this, one, your piston's probably going to come flying out and careening across the room and break something expensive. That's where our super special high-tech piece of wood comes in. We will put it right there, and that will keep that piston from flying all the way out. Don't choose a really rotted piece of wood. This is just pine, I think. The next thing that we also want to do, though, is because this system still has some brake fluid in it. That's how brakes work, right? Hydraulic brakes. So in order to keep us from getting too yucked up, I'm going to take our super trusty plastic bag here. I'm going to throw my caliper inside. It'll be hard to see for just a moment, but I apologize. I will take it right back out, stick my piece of wood in there, and now whenever that piston comes out and some fluid in it will definitely be spurting all over the place, but I'll be able to capture it here in our plastic bag. So I'm going to take the nozzle, just stick it into my brake line just like this. If you've taken your brake lines, you can stick it directly into the caliper if you want. But give it a little bit of a blow here. Oh, See what I mean about making a mess? So this caliper actually is a little bit more recalcitrant than the last one I worked on. So I may have to turn up the pressure because 40 PSI is not doing it. So I'm going to bump it up a little bit. Let's try 60. So that's all you need, a little bit of pressure. But if you only have hand tools and you don't have compressed air, ain't no way that you're going to get the piston out any other way. I've heard of some people who use the brake pedal to push their piston out. Well, you can do that. It makes a gigantic mess, and obviously there's not an easy way to do it because you have to have the caliper on the car. Don't really recommend that. So if you can do this with compressed air, it's by far the safest and most controlled way to do that. So peeling back our protective layer here, you can see that piston is almost fully extended, but using a 1x4 like this, I was able to keep it from flying out. So now it's at the point where I can just wiggle it out of here. And that's it. That's our stock piston. So obviously at this point, you should double check, make sure that you've got the same size piston. This one, of course, is, because this is the right one for this particular caliper. But that's the old one. We won't be using it. And now we're going to do a little bit of cleanup. There will be brake fluid, so if you haven't already, make sure you've got a towel, some plastic down, because you will make a mess. Pull out our dust boot here, and then we're going to take a peek in the caliper itself. Give it a little bit of a wipe, because what we're doing now is we want to make sure that there aren't any major scores, scratches, debris, rust, or something like that in there that we need to be careful to either remove or determine that we need to get a different caliper. Fortunately, this one's in pretty good shape. If you do regular brake fluid bleeds on your car, once every year at least, hopefully, then this is probably what it's going to look like. So now, there is a rubber O-ring in here, basically this guy, that we're going to pull out using one of our handy-dandy picks. And I'm just going to gently push my pick in there and wiggle that guy free, just like that. And this one's not in terrible shape. It actually looks like it's okay. But because we have brand new parts here in front of us, why would we put old stuff back in? So at this point, what we're going to do is give this a little bit of a clean. We want to make sure that there isn't any debris, either that was in there or that I managed to get in there since disassembling it. Another handy trick that I like to do to make sure that I don't have a whole bunch of brake fluid that I'm making a mess with is that I'll stuff my rag in there, and then I'll blow a little bit more compressed air through. There we go. And that just ensures that I don't have to worry about dribbling brake fluid everywhere. So, get a new rag, and I'm going to use a little bit of brake clean. And then I'm going to wipe it up, and we'll be ready to start assembly. Okay, so one last little peek in here. I can see actually there's a little bit of crud here in the groove for the dust boot. So I am going to use my pick just to clean that out. Make sure that that's not going to have any yucky stuff that'll make a bad seal later on. And when you're cleaning these out using brake cleaner, once you're happy with it, you do need to make sure that all of your brake cleaner evaporates or is sopped up with your rag. Sometimes solvents like this can have a detrimental effect on rubber. This stuff is pretty hardy because it has to withstand brake fluid, so it's probably okay, but just to be on the safe side, give it a minute or so if you need to, or you can also use compressed air to blow into the bore to make sure that it's all dried up and ready to go, nice and clean. All right, so now, get some of this stuff out of the way. We have our caliper ready to go with the new stuff. We aren't going to get to the piston just yet. The first thing we have to do is install the new piston seal. So this guy, I prefer to insert one side and then just walk it around with my other fingers. And you will have to kind of bend and squish it up a little bit, but a little bit of finagling and you can get it to fit right into its groove, nice and happy. So I did that dry, I didn't lubricate it, but now we are going to lubricate that ring because we actually do need to make sure that it's easy for us to install our piston. So if you try to insert this without lubrication, it probably would catch that O-ring seal and like pull it out of its groove or damage it otherwise. So provided with this kit is this handy little red rubber lube, and this is stuff that will actually break down with your brake fluid, so kind of like an engine assembly lube basically, but for brake calipers. So you have one of these that's included with the kit. I already have one open, so I'm actually just going to use this one and just squirt a little bit of that stuff. Don't have to go crazy, a little dab will do ya. Got a little bit in there and then a little bit on the edge of my finger, and I'm just going to lubricate that piston seal. And if you get it a little bit on the inside of the bore, it's not going to hurt anything. Again, this stuff is intended to work with and break down in brake fluid, and it will not cause problems. Okay, so now I have that all lubricated, ready to go. And now it's time to install our piston. So this guy looks like a cup. The bottom of the cup, essentially, this is what goes in first. The open side is what presses against your pads. So I'm going to position it right here, and then I'm going to just carefully apply a little bit of pressure. You can kind of wiggle it, rock it a little bit as you need to, and then you'll feel it line up, and then it'll just slide right in, easy peasy. So now I've got the piston installed, and the next step that we need to do is install the dust boot. So this one is probably the hardest part, and not because it's actually difficult, just because it's a little finagly. So just because I did this once already, this has an inner seal, this guy, and then of course the seal for the piston itself. So make sure you have it this way around, otherwise you'll be redoing this. There we go. So now you can see that even though I don't have it tucked here, that seal is actually a lot more flush with the lip of the piston itself. And then pushing the piston all the way in makes it a little bit easier to seat the edge where it actually tucks into the caliper body. And sorry if my hands are getting in the way of you guys being able to see. Travis does a pretty good job, but my hands are not see-through. Okay, so now you can see just a little bit down here is left to get it nice and seated in there. And sometimes just walking it around a little bit back and forth is all it takes. Sometimes you have to coerce it a little bit more. So I'm still having a hard time getting this one part on this kind of inside lip seated. So this is where I'm going to use that trick of trying to just kind of pull the caliper boot around a little bit, make it a little bit more accessible for where it's not seated. That way I can kind of get my pick in there a little bit easier. And just walk that seal down in there. Oh, we're real close. Okay, I think we are there. So you can see now that this boot is pretty much flush with the lip of the piston, and this is what you want. If you see it where it's pooching out anywhere, double check that you have it fully seated. So that's the hard part, I swear. That's the most difficult part, and that's not because it's hard, it's just tedious. Now we get to deal with the sliders. So these sliders, at least on this caliper, they have two little channels. And for the larger bolt on this one anyway, it's just a little collar, comes right off. And then for the smaller bolt, it has a collar, but then it also has a full sleeve on the inside. So this guy is the reason why we have both our pliers here, and in this case, my favorite not lubricant that acts as a good lubricant, Simple Green. So I'm going to pull that little collar back a little bit, squirt just a little bit of Simple Green. You can also use something like WD-40 here if you want to. But the reason I like Simple Green is that one, it's a degreaser, and two, when it dries, it does not dry, it does not leave any residue. So grab onto the collar a little bit and you can pull and wiggle. If you need to, spray a little bit more Simple Green down in there. It will fight you because most of the time these are just crusty. If you don't have any luck pulling it out from the collar side, try pulling it out from the hat side. There's not a wrong answer here. And because we're not reusing this, if you tear it up a little bit, it's okay. Yeah, so this one is being pretty hard to pull out from the collar side, so I'm going to try pulling it out from the hat side. There we go. Actually, that worked out quite a bit better. So, there's our little tube. That is also donezo. So now, we are left with just a bare hole on this side of the caliper bracket. And on this side, we actually have a slide tube, and it should have grease already in there. So, because it's probably old, crusty grease, I'm going to spray a little bit of brake clean down in there. I'm going to wiggle my screwdriver around a little bit. This would actually be a great spot that if you had some Q-tips that you can waggle down in there and get some of the old crusty grease out after you sprayed some brake clean, that would be ideal. Okay, so quick inspection. I just want to make sure that nothing is terribly rusty crusty. This little sleeve is part of the caliper bracket, so if this is messed up for whatever reason or just super nasty, that may be another point that you might consider just replacing the bracket rather than trying to refurbish it at this point. But looking at it here, I can see that it's actually relatively shiny now that I've cleaned it out with brake clean. So we're going to continue to use this. So first step that I'm going to do is take the new slide tube for the small bolt. And I am going to use our not lubricant and spray it all up. We want to insert it from the side that basically is going to face the caliper. And you can fold this up. It is fresh new rubber, so it will bend, it will twist. You just don't want to rip or tear it. But I like to get it started like that. And then again, if you have a poking instrument, preferably something with a very blunt end, that way you don't accidentally poke through this little booty guy. I'm just going to walk it down through very carefully, very easy, making sure I don't actually puncture the end of it there. And you can see that I'm just barely pushing it, and then it just popped out this other side. So now it is installed. So this other guy, the other hat, this one is much easier because there's just a little lip on this metal piece, and this collar just slides over and around the top of that metal. Maybe that's a better view. And you can just walk it all the way around, and you can stretch it a little bit until you can see that right there now it's grabbing on. So that's good to go. So now our caliper bracket is complete. This is ready. So our two halves of the solution here to having new refresh brake calipers that should work great are ready, and we need to do one more thing before we put them together, and that is we need to lube up our slide pins, or in this case, slide bolts. So with this kit is a little packet of white slide pin lube, and this is what we want to use here. For the purposes of this video, I'm actually going to use a different lube just because it's easier to see. So this is actually a gray lube rather than a clear lube. But actually, on these particular ones, I'm actually going to install them into the caliper first. But what we're going to do is cover the slide portion, and just so that way I don't goober up the threads and get them all greased. You can't do this on all of the other calipers. So if you have like the sport calipers, or I think the NCs, you won't be able to do it this way. But for these ones, because you can actually take the bracket off of the caliper without removing these bolts at all, we're going to do it this way just to show how easy it is. So these are just loosely installed. We'll torque them after we get everything put back together. But I'm going to squirt just a little bit of this lube on both of the slide pins. You don't have to go crazy. Maybe about a pea-sized smear on both of them. And then just use your finger to wipe the grease back and forth just to get some good coverage on the slider. So you see why I'm using the dark stuff now, to be able to see how I've smeared the grease. We're just looking to try to get a little bit of a film. That's it. So those are lubed up, ready to go. The other thing that I do like to also do, just because you have a little bit of room, is I'll take some of this lube and I'll squirt it into these new boots. And I'll try to get it down actually into the slide portion where it would be, rather than just in the accordion section of the boots. I'm just going to squirt maybe another pea-sized worth of lube down in there. And then with these guys, you just line up and walk them together. And then once you have them in position, you can kind of give them a little squeeze, and then the tops of those collars will automatically slip over a little notch on each one of the slide pin bolts. So now this is back together and almost ready to go. when you have everything together, to make sure that you don't have any issues with your slide pins, or if there's any junk or rust or something like that in the bores, I usually like to give it a little bit of a action, just make sure it slides smoothly. I don't hear any kind of crunchiness whenever this actuates. This is moving really easily. I mean, I can move it with just a couple of fingers. So that's good to go. Now, lastly, what we're going to do is replace our brake bleeder. So for this particular caliper, I need an 8mm wrench. And break that guy loose. And this one just looks a little dirty, but actually it looks like it's probably in just fine condition if we wanted to reuse it. But again, we have brand new shiny parts, so why would we want to do that? Okay, so there's our old brake bleeder. And then our new brake bleeder, these should be almost identical. Yours may look just a little bit different from the factory one, and that's okay. The important thing is that your threads are the same size and that those tapers are about the same size. This one actually has a little bit of rounded end, but that's okay. We're just looking to make sure that when we try to thread this in, it actually will thread in. There we go, and yep, just by hand I can get it to thread in, so everything is going hunky-dory there. So now you can tighten this down, and then when you're ready to put these back on the car and bleed them, you're ready to go. And very lastly, we have the cap for our bleeder. So now we have a freshly rebuilt caliper, and yes, the rest of the caliper does look a little grungy, but fortunately, those parts still work because all they do are hold the actual important moving bits in place. So now, you put this back on your car, make sure that you torque up these bolts. And of course, you got the 2 bolts that bolt the caliper bracket to the upright on the car. Install your pads, install the little sliders, the little side clips, and then springs if you have tension springs. Not all calipers do, so make sure that if yours does, that you do use those springs. And then bleed your brakes, you're ready to go. These should function like brand new. You know, the outside, the bodies may look a little bit grungy, and if that bothers you, actually, this is a great time that if you got everything stripped apart, you can get them cleaned up. You can even take these down to your local powder coating shop if you want, or paint them yourself. Make sure you use a high temperature powder coat or paint. You will need something that can get pretty toasty because brakes do get hot. So don't just put your average Walmart rattle can paint on it. But that's it in a nutshell. You'll be left over with some old stuff that you won't reuse and a caliper that is ready to go back on the car. If this is a rear caliper, you will have an extra little piece to be able to set the tension on your parking brake, which we didn't show because these are front calipers, but basically there's one extra step that you'll need to wind that guy out. And then when it's put it back in the car, you'll need to wind it back in and then set the tension. So that's the only real big difference on the front versus rear, but all the front calipers are very close to the same kind of process. They all have the same basic parts. Some of them may just look a little bit different than what you saw here today. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you learned something. Since I've gone ahead and talked and showed you what to do in this scenario, let's take a break and see if there are any questions. Do we have any questions about what I've done? No. Okay, so either that means this was super boring, or you guys learned everything you needed to do a brake refresh and go. What are you waiting for? Rebuild your calipers, get back to good brakes. We went from crusty to trusty, and that's all we're looking to do for not a whole bunch of money. So hopefully this was a good video. If you have any questions, or if there's something about this that I didn't talk about that you would like to have answers for or would like to bug us about, feel free to give us a call, drop a comment below. You can email us, whatever you'd like, and we will get back to you so that way we can help you out with whatever you need to refresh your Miata. Thanks again for joining. We sure appreciate it. If you have suggestions on what other things you'd like for us to talk about in Facebook Live videos in the future, please also drop those in the comments below. We'd love to hear your suggestions, and maybe something like this, if you just want us to rebuild a caliper or whatever, it may show up in a future video. So thank you for all of your suggestions. Thank you for all of your comments and for your time. We appreciate your attention, and we will see you all next week on FN Live. Thanks again.